I know we've done this in pockets across the state for, student pastors and kind of swapped ideas and talked about different things. But myself and Jacob just really kind of had the idea of, hey, what if we kind of expanded that and actually made it more of like a webinar of sorts where we could just be trained and consider the times that we're in and how we can faithfully lead teenagers. A thing that I've heard often in this time is that it's an unprecedented time. And I think that's true on one level. Certainly in all of history, we've seen things like this happen before, but in our lifetime, I don't think that we've seen that. And we kind of have a unique responsibility in leading teenagers through this, leading middle and high school students. And I know myself as a student pastor, really just want to be faithful to that calling in this season and want to be faithful to what the Lord has called me to do in our church at Lake Murray. And then really want to also just be helpful to other guys and glean things from other people that are much smarter and wiser than I am. And so, while I think it's really hard to predict what exactly students will be dealing with emotionally and mentally in the days ahead, I think that's kind of hard to predict because it's an unprecedented thing. I do think that part of our responsibility as student pastors is to kind of look a little bit further down the road and kind of think about, okay, what are some things we could expect in the lives of teenagers in the coming weeks, and really be prepared for what we might see in students. And so I really do think that counseling, discipling, leading students through just some deep and difficult emotions and reactions in this season is something that we should be prepared for, because I think it's something that we may end up seeing in the coming weeks and perhaps even months. And so I thought that it would be really valuable to bring in some licensed counselors in Dylan and Deandra who have experience in counseling. And one of the things that I love about them is that they're in the local church and they're working within the local church, and they are spending week in and week out time with teenagers. And so they kind of have that firsthand experience as well as with their professional experience. And so I want to give them a chance just to introduce themselves. And so would love for, we'll start with you, Deandra. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe just what led you into counseling, how long you've been counseling, and again, just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are.
So I'm Deandra Comer. Some of you recognize my last name as being D-Hub's wife. I guess in this circuit, that's definitely kind of how I'm known as his wife. But I work at First Baptist Spartanburg. My job there is twofold. I serve as the minister to girls, and so that encompasses, for us, it's not just student ministry. I do children's ministry with that, student ministry, and then college ministry. So we've kind of coined the phrase like 6 to 26 as kind of being the girls that fall under me. And then the second part of my job is we have a counseling department at our church. It's called New Day Counseling Department. And so I work in New Day, predominantly doing all the counseling for kids and teenagers. I've been doing counseling I graduated in May from Liberty with my professional counseling degree. So not very long. But when I think about one of the reasons that brought me to counseling, in my family, I'm a triplet. So I have two brothers, we're the same age. Obviously. And so in our family, growing up, I was definitely, more driven towards spiritual things and more following after the Lord. But in my family, there was just some issues in my family where I just began to see like how important mental health was, and specifically how important mental health was from a Christian perspective. And so the Lord I started at Anderson University with a ministry major. Second semester of my sophomore year, I switched that to psychology and still minored in ministry, but the Lord began to show me that He wanted me dealing with families specifically and mental health and things like that from a Christian perspective. So that's kind of a little bit of my story.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Deandra. So glad you're on this and excited to be able to learn from your experience. Dylan, same thing to you, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What led you into counseling, kind of what you do day in and day out.
Yeah, so I'm Dylan Davis. I am from Lexington. Well, live in Lexington, South Carolina. I'm originally from Seneca. Some of you might know me as D-Hub's friend. I worked at Somersault with him, and I'm sure I recognize a lot of you guys from Somersault and other things too. So it's good to see you guys. So I guess I'll start there about how I got into counseling. And a lot of it was Somersault and interacting with students there, who came with all kinds of, stories of abuse and trauma and struggle with issues of identity and sexuality and a lot of things that, as a college student, I didn't really know how to deal with. I knew that I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to love people. And I knew how to deal with my own issues, and I knew how to, seek out the wisdom of the people around me and through scripture and stuff like that. But it was really difficult for me to know what to say or what to do or how to practically help these people or these students through those times. So after I graduated Clemson, with a little bit of manipulation from Josh Powell, I ended up down here in Gamecock country. And I started at CIU, finished up there in the clinical counseling program in 2015. So I've been practicing almost 5 years now. I'm in Southern Med Counseling, which is in downtown Lexington. I work with children, students, adults. I work with everybody with everything, from 3-year-old kids with attention and defines issues up to 60-year-old men with anxiety and anger issues. So I see everybody. But it's been a real blessing to be able to integrate those two things, my love of God and people, but also with, I guess, the more professional, like clinical side of it, of practically helping people, giving skills, helping people to learn the skills and learn how to cope with these things on their own, a lot of times from a biblical standpoint. So yeah.
No, that's great. I appreciate, again, both of you guys being on here, and just love that we can kind of bring those two things together, right? The biblical perspective along with just professional counseling and mental health, and kind of see how both of those things can work together as we move forward and seek to minister to teenagers. So I want to just begin with this question. What, from both of your perspectives, what can we expect to maybe see or observe in students over the next few weeks and maybe over the next couple of months? We've probably already seen a little bit of that in the last couple of weeks, but from y'all's estimation, what can you maybe what do you think we can see or observe in students emotionally and mentally over the next few weeks and months? And we'll start with Deandra.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you have seen a lot of these things already, but as I was kind of thinking about this question, I think we're going to see an increase, even more so, in loneliness. I think we're going to see an increase in self-isolation, boredom, discontentment, increased family issues, just from an extended amount of time that families are spending together. I think we're going to see some negative self-talk. From things arising from having to do school by themselves and not being in the things that really bring them value and self-worth. I think we're going to see anxiety, sadness, disappointment, all kind of things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Dylan, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's mostly a lot of those things. Anxiety, the low motivation with school is what I hear a lot. Obviously, as time goes on, that's probably the biggest factor, is just the amount of time and the unknowns with it. That's going to bring a lot of what ifs from the anxiety standpoint. And as emotional resources start to get depleted from just the constant barrage of school and not being able to do anything, and the boredom and the disappointment, I think we start to see a little bit of hopelessness and some of the depressed mood after some of those emotional resources are kind of spent. Which leads to irritability, and they're just going to get restless. But I think a lot of students, they're going to handle it differently. Right? They're all individuals, so they all handle it differently. So, I got some kids that I work with that are procrastinating on their schoolwork. Some of them are like on top of it. Some people are obsessing about the virus. Some people, like, they seem totally unaware. And some students are just making memes about it, and that's all they do about it. They're just kind of living their life and going fishing. So.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt about that. The lake is not closed. I guess the on ramp into the lake is, but the lake is not closed. And so down here at Lake Murray, that definitely is something that we're seeing, is that fish are being caught. How can we begin to identify some of these emotions? I know it can be difficult it can perhaps be difficult to identify them if we're not face to face, but how can we begin to see some of these things even in a digital world where most of our interaction is really just through technology, through video chats, through interaction, social media, and that kind of, how can we begin to identify some of these emotions? Either one of you.
Well, I think obviously, I know most of you guys are working on and still doing small groups and stuff and still finding ways to connect with your students. So obviously in those kind of forums, you'd be able to kind of gather, if anybody's struggling with anything, you do prayer requests and stuff, they'll be able to directly tell you some of them. I guess mainly not being as connected as before. We do have social media. So I would pay attention to what are the posts that are coming up. And this might be oversimplifying it a little bit, but you'll probably have some kids that are just kind of generally maybe saying, hey, pray for this, or here's what's going on. These are the things we're dealing with. And that might be it. They're just kind of looking for just like general support. And then there might be the kids that are kind of like, the loneliness and the depressed stuff that might kind of come out, and they're just kind of posting as a means of attention seeking or something like that. So regardless of their motivations and why they're posting, there's a need that needs to be met there. So maybe the best way to handle that is, just kind of directly message them. Don't comment on the thing because I think that kind of maybe encourages shallow connections or, just quick validation through fake internet points. And I don't think that's really what helps us, in the long term. So just directly message your students if you see them post, whether you think it's attention seeking or just them genuinely looking for support. It doesn't really matter. Just directly message them so that you can kind of have a deeper connection, a deeper conversation about it, just not in the comments and publicly. And that's anytime. That's, during this crisis, the COVID stuff, but also just in general, when you see a post like that from one of your students, it's better to directly enter into a conversation privately.
That's great. Anything to add to that, Deandra?
Yeah, that's awesome. I was definitely thinking social media interactions with students, like not discounting, their small text to you, pray for this, take all those opportunities to expound on what's really going on in their life. One other thing I was thinking from a student ministry perspective is don't discount like the friendships that they have. We can definitely learn a lot about what our students are going through, sometimes through conversations with their friends. You can encourage your students to check up on their friends, their discipleship groups, their small groups. And then from that, you can pursue a conversation, like how is so-and-so doing? Like what did you guys discuss? Things like that. So not portraying or breaking confidence, but definitely, if you see somebody struggling doing it in different kind of avenues, if they're not willing to talk to you quite yet, see what you can do from a parent or a friend perspective.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that just recognizing and knowing that students are talking to one another. And so even if they may not come directly to us with a concern or with something that they're dealing with, picking that up from other students and then maybe opening the door for a student to have that conversation with you because you heard something else. Again, not breaking confidence can be really helpful. Let's dive a little bit deeper into an emotion I know that both of you mentioned, and that is anxiety and stress. And I know that both of those things are kind of closely related to one another, but maybe talk a little bit about what is the difference between anxiety and stress, and maybe where do those come from? And really what is a biblical way for us to counsel and lead students through that? I know many on the call here have probably, we all probably at some level have done some counseling before, and we probably have different levels of experience in that. I know for myself, I've taken a class, but I certainly don't remember everything. And these type of things are good refreshers and helpful reminders for us. So let's dig a little bit deeper into just anxiety, stress, the difference between those, where's it come from, and then how we can lead students specifically through that emotion of anxiety and stress. So we'll start, we'll go with Deandra. We'll start with you if that's all right.
Yeah, that's perfect. So anxiety and stress are closely related, but they're different. Stress originates from external factors. Stress comes from, I have a test tomorrow and I'm nervous about it, or I've got this sports thing, or I've had a fight with my parents. And most of the time, stress subsides after the external issue is over with. Anxiety is more internally rooted. Anxiety comes, from just a persistent amount of stress. Anxiety comes a lot of times. I've learned that the number one cause of anxiety a lot of times is just lies and things that we tell ourselves that aren't necessarily true. I think anxiety and stress is going to be huge in the coming weeks with our students, just from the perspective of they don't know what's going on. And so that is where a lot of times your brain begins to tell you things that are true or aren't true, but you begin to just kind of wander in your own thoughts down certain avenues or certain roads. And that's a lot of times where anxiety can stem from just continuing like that spiral of your thoughts. And so one of the things I think that we can do, like as student ministers, as people who work with students and children, as far as stress goes, a lot of your students are going to be stressed with school and things like that coming up, just from the fact of avoidance. A lot of us, do that. We avoid behaviors that are stress inducing. I think it's our job to encourage them, like, okay, you're really stressed about this. Well, get it done, and that's going to go away. If you're hanging out on Lake Murray and you're not doing your schoolwork, it's just building and building and building. Let's get that done, and then let's move on to the next thing. So encourage them not to do as many avoidant behaviors. I think that we can encourage students with truths. With anxiety, you really have to teach them to retrain and to reframe their thoughts. And so encouraging them with the truths, like you don't have to, make straight A's. You don't have to, be getting every scholarship under the sun. God made us differently. So encouraging, those Colossians 3:23 thoughts of working, as you're working for the Lord, not for men, doing the best at everything that you can do, but also like encouraging them in the fact that, you are you're different. You don't have to be all these things. As far as like the virus goes and things like that, that's easy for students just to trace those rabbit holes of, I don't know what's going to happen with this. I don't know if we're going to have prom. I don't know if we're going to have graduation. I don't know if my parents are going to get sick, because a lot of them are going to go down those avenues of, am I going to get this, or my parents going to get this? What's going to happen if we do? Just really trying to keep their thoughts in the reality, like we've got to get rid of those what if statements and really focus on, this is the truth. This is what's happening. And we're dealing with this as it comes along.
That's really good. Really, really helpful and practical. Dylan, any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah. So obviously, with that anxiety, stress being kind of normal, like everybody experiences stress. So, but I think obviously anxiety is our emotional response to that. And usually we think of anxiety as a negative thing. The unhealthy amount of anxiety, excessive worry and distress, I guess, is the main thing that causes the impairments that Deandra was talking about. Both behavioral, we talked about irritability, lack of concentration, those obsessive thoughts that Deandra was talking about, which often lead to compulsive behaviors of us trying to artificially create control within our lives. So, and then oftentimes you see that, turning into could turn into eating disorders and stuff like that. Sometimes we try to create control where we don't have control to manage that anxiety. And then you're also going to have a bunch of potentially physical symptoms, lack of sleep, which some of them are probably voluntarily having a lack of sleep, which also increases the anxiety. Might affect appetite. Sometimes we feel nauseous if we're overly anxious for a long period of time. And some students may even experience panic attacks, with those thoughts kind of growing and snowballing in their head and the physical symptoms and everything going on, and realizing they're behind on their school and stuff. We might actually turn into a panic attack, and which is never a fun experience. And another thing to pay attention to is, again, that time factor where, the longer we feel this way, then it's going to further deepen that feeling of hopelessness of like, when is this going to end? And I'm not really sure when it's going to end, which is a kind of a shortcut to depression, honestly, because depression isn't just sadness. It's that feeling of hopelessness of like, things are bad right now, and I'm not really sure how they're going to get better. So obviously, Deandra had some good advice there, reminding them of the promises of God. Encouraging them to take action against things and not to avoid them. And I would also just make yourself open to listening and allow them to express their fears, allow them to talk about it. And before you move to the teaching piece or the instructing of giving wisdom, make sure you validate them. And that's Lola. I don't know if you can hear her. She's screaming. She wants to go outside. But remember to validate or affirm your students and their fears, and maybe even normalize that a little bit. But like, hey, we're all kind of a little on edge. We all kind of like don't really know what's going on, and that's okay. We're doing it together. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, kind of thing. And then maybe move into the instructing and giving wisdom and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I know myself, and I'm sure others have a tendency to immediately want to go towards teaching, right? I mean, we're pastors, we're leaders. We want to teach, we want to instruct, we want to help, we want to counsel. When really the first step in a lot of instances is to listen, and that listening then informs the teaching that we give. And so I think that's really, really helpful. Those are some great things that you guys mentioned there. Another thing that I'm hearing, I know from our students, when I ask them, hey, what are you feeling? How are you processing these things? Is I'm bored. I'm really, really bored. And I know that like boredom can seem like, well, that's just kind of normal. That's fine. But this was one that I kind of wanted to open up a conversation about as well. That why should this be something that really we warn students against? And then how do we help point them in healthy directions away from boredom? And so just give us your thoughts on why can boredom become kind of a dangerous thing? I know we probably know some simple answers to that, but why should this be something that we are kind of aware of and that we encourage students against? I'll come to you first this time, Dylan.
Yeah. So obviously God, he created us to be kind of purpose-driven people. So we need the work. We need something to do, something meaningful to do. And we work with a generation of students who are, and maybe as a culture we're moving this way too. We're more consumers, right? We're watching people play video games. We're watching people do things on YouTube. We watch, we consume, we scroll through Instagram. We do that. So really, again, encourage your students to take action, to do things against the negative emotions and stuff, but also exploring gifts and talents, exploring hobbies, just in general for their mental health and their well-being, and to make them feel like they actually had a purpose that day, or that they completed something. And the schoolwork can become part of that too. They actually completed something that had a purpose. And then also you want to prioritize meaningful pursuits. Obviously we all know from Ecclesiastes, work and purpose, things like that are fine and great, but they don't have lasting consequences. And so yeah, obviously you need to be pursuing God's word, prayer, serving others even in whatever capacity that they can. Those are going to be the things that help them feel more satisfied.
That's good. Deandra?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that we're made for purpose. So that's where a season like this that looks different can be difficult. It can be hard on students. I think one of the major things that we can do, just kind of going off what Dylan was talking about, we can encourage routine, specifically prioritizing the things that give us purpose. Wake up at a certain time. If you're sleeping until 2:00 in the afternoon, you're not really accomplishing as much as you need to accomplish. So encouraging our students, like, what would your routine look like? If that's getting up at 9:30 in the morning, eating breakfast and working on school, encourage them with purpose that we can help give them. Maybe that looks like giving, them a few people that they can call. We can give them reasons to continue to serve and reasons to continue to pursue purpose. One of the other things I was thinking about just from a female perspective, but guys too. Sometimes boredom leads to comparison, which can be super difficult. As far as our mental health goes, when we begin to compare our lives with other people's lives. Social media is not really, people aren't posting as much. They're not posting the seasons where they're bored, where they're sitting on the couch with nothing to do. They're posting the things that they're doing with their families that look cool, the things that they're doing with their friends, going out on Lake Murray. Those are the kind of things that they're posting. And so our students are in this spot right now where they're getting on social media, where they're Snapchatting, they're doing all those things, and they're seeing these lives that other people seem to be living, and they're bored. And so that really gives the devil a foothold with comparison. My life isn't as good as theirs. I'm not as cool as them. I didn't get invited to do this. And so us as student ministers just need to be ready for those comparing thoughts, which do lead to a lot of mental issues. So being ready to affirm them, being ready to give them some things that give them purpose, things like that.
I think that's really good. I like the structure piece, right? I think that some students are seeing this as like vacation, right? I think slowly that's like wearing off, right? Like the first week or two becomes like this, oh man, this is like vacation. And then they look down and have 10 assignments that they haven't done in the last week. And so then all the emotions kind of begin to swell up, but really encouraging them to create some structure and then giving them purpose towards good things. I know some guys even on this call have given challenges to students, have asked them to share their testimony on social media, and have asked them to do a devotion on social media. I think those are great. I think those things help students and push students in the right direction, away from boredom and away towards purposeful things. I think those things are really, really good. And I think too, one of the things I've found is while social media becomes like the thing we're going to, it's also healthy to get away from that at times, especially for our students, is to disconnect from that. I know we all know that. That's something I know we've found helpful, is to encourage our students to not always be on there. That's really good. Another emotion that I think that we may see more and more, especially as news comes out, perhaps that school may not go back to normal, or may not even go back into session this school year, is the emotion of disappointment, of real deep disappointment for certain students who their sports seasons have come to an end, seniors who all of the excitement of April and May is no more. Their senior year and prom and graduation and all those things are going to look different or aren't going to happen at all. And so there's this real deep disappointment in students that they're not going to get to experience the things that they were hoping to experience this coming year. Can you talk just a little bit about, where does that come from, and what truth can we point students towards when it comes to the disappointment that they may be feeling during this time? So either one of y'all want to jump on that first?
I'll jump on it first.
Yeah.
So disappointment really is sadness that comes from unfulfilled hopes and expectations. It really is a real emotion that our students are feeling. I told you guys I do girls ministry. So one of the conversations that I'm having on a daily basis is, oh my goodness, what if we don't have prom? And so it's a real thing for a lot of our students, and that comes from prom, graduation, finishing the school year, sports seasons have been canceled, birthday parties look different. Some of those things, like me just listening to it, like in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, like in the grand scheme of things, that's not really a huge deal. But for me, it's my job and our job not to discount those things. The disappointment of not being able to go to prom is really real. The disappointment of my birthday party doesn't look the way that I wanted it to. My mom organized a drive-by parade, and that was awesome, but I didn't get to talk to anybody. That's a real emotion. That they're really struggling with that stuff. And so I think for us, it's important that we listen to that and then we affirm them in those feelings. that stinks. That sucks. It's terrible. One of the things that I was just thinking about in relation to this question is that we can encourage them with perspective. Like obviously that's easier said than done. But a lot of times our disappointments come from our perspective. And so that's where we as student ministers, we as counselors are really having to focus on, okay, how can we take this and see something good that comes out of it? And obviously, the Bible tells us in Romans 8:28 that all things work together for the good, those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes. Well, it's our job to help our students in realizing, okay, like this is a hardship for me, like this sucks, it's difficult, but God is going to use this for good, and helping them to see those ways that he can do that. It's our job to point them to perspective, but to really understand that disappointment's real and we need to affirm them in those feelings.
That's really good. Dylan, what else you got?
No, yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. We start with, again, affirming and validating, and then shift to, all right, well, how can we look at it differently? How can we make the best of it? How can we shift our perspective on those things? And ultimately, all this goes back to our desire for control, right? We had our expectations, we had our hopes, and didn't happen. And I guess the quick answer to that, don't say this, but, that's life. That's just kind of how things are, and we know that as adults, but we kind of have to kind of pastor and shepherd our kids and our students through that so they can learn to deal with it. So obviously helping them shift their perspective, but honestly, that's what we have to kind of do. We have to encourage them to develop an attitude of thanksgiving. Like, what do we do? What do we have? What are the things that we, what are the opportunities? Like I'm off work, for the next, I work 2 days a week for the next 3 weeks, and which is not great because I'll get paid less. But my immediate thing was to jump to, okay, what can I do with that time? What can I do, around my house or with my family? So obviously not ideal in some circumstances, but you can shift the way you look at it. And obviously I can be thankful for a lot of the time and the flexibility that I've been given. So that's what we want to encourage in our students. We want to model that to our students. And I think a lot of the guys around our state have been doing that, staying positive and finding ways to connect and not letting this slow their ministry down. So I think that's already modeling to them that things are going to be okay and that things can kind of like continue moving forward despite setbacks and disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I love that whole idea of just really trying to shift perspective, right? I mean, we're shifting it from a perspective of kind of woe is me and this is, what are we going to do? And then again, that lack of control towards a perspective. Okay, how can we see how the Lord might be using this in my life and using this in our church and using this in the lives of my friends? And how can I see this not as a burden, but really as an opportunity for God to work in my life? I do just want to, I've just got one, maybe two other questions for you guys. I just want to remind everyone on here, if you've got a question, man, would love to hear from you guys and what questions you have for Dylan and Deandra. And so feel free to message Bryant. There's a little way to do that on the Zoom call. You can chat privately to someone. You can just indicate who you want to chat to, and you can do that to Bryant. And feel free to submit a question in for them. And we'll have some time here at the end to be able to go through a few of those questions. So just want to remind that to everyone. And so I just want to maybe ask this question. This is pretty broad, and we've already hit on this a little bit already. What are some practical things? Like, what are some things that are this is we want some handles for this, right? We've talked a little bit just about the things that lead to these emotions. We've kind of dove into the emotions themselves, but what are some things practically that you guys would suggest that we do in the coming weeks and the coming days? And really, we want to get practical on this. So suggestions, tips, things that maybe you've seen done already that you would say, hey, that's actually going to be really good for students and their mental health, their spiritual health moving forward. So either one of you guys want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so just a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking about, and a lot of stuff you guys are probably already doing. I know a lot of you are keeping up small groups. You're keeping up, your Bible studies. Those are great And so I would also encourage your small group leaders, to be following up and that kind of thing with your students, especially those that seem to be expressing, in small group or on social media or whatever, that they are in need of maybe a little bit extra help. And encourage those connections, try to pull them away from the isolation where those excessive thoughts might take hold. And I know a lot of you are already probably addressing stuff in your Bible study, so obviously continue to do that. That helps everybody feel like we're in it together. There's a sense of unity there when we're kind of talking about it as a cohesive whole. So that also kind of helps with those obsessive thoughts where, someone feels like they're isolated and they're the only one afraid. They're the only one that has these problems, the only one dealing with it. So you want to promote that connection and unity. And again, I know I keep harping on this, but, validate their feelings, validate the things they're experiencing, validate their disappointments, validate their anxieties, and then encourage them to take action and to do things that actually kind of shift those things.
It's really good. Deandra?
Yeah, I mean, Dylan pretty much hit the nail on the head, but just encouraging ways for students to connect. Before Jacob and I got married, I lived by myself for almost 5 years. And what was easy for me in that season sometimes would be to get off work and to just go home and watch TV and don't have any connections. Sometimes what I had to push myself to do was to pick up the phone and call somebody, or to make a way for me to hang out with people outside of work and stuff like that, which obviously they can't hang out. But sometimes it's a lot harder for us to make those connections than it would be for us just to stay home and to watch Netflix. And so really making sure that we as student ministers are giving, encouraging, like connect with people, call people, text people, FaceTime. I think also we can encourage them to journal, vlog, things like that in this season. It'll be really cool for them just to get their feelings out every day, whether that's through prayer journaling or if they, want to keep a diary or whatever it is. I think it'll be a cool way for them to look back on this season, and for us as student ministers to encourage them. If you journal this, you can look back on this season and you can see what the Lord has done in your life. Lots of self-care things are important, which we'll kind of get to that a little bit, but exercise is so important, and that's a part of the routine that we're asking them to build, like making sure that they're doing different things. I think one of the biggest things that we can encourage them right now is do something in this season that you normally wouldn't have time to do. If you're a big sister or you're a big brother or a little brother, like spend time with your siblings, like make it a point to do something with them. Really focus on those times, like you and your family haven't established a family game night. Well, let's get it going now. Like y'all, once a week, let's play games. Let's do something. Really encourage them to capitalize on this season as being something that they can't normally do. And that goes back to the perspective change, but what they can be doing to really give them stuff to do. For girls, encourage them. Sit at home and do your nails, and y'all talk to your friend while you're doing it and pretend you're at the nail salon getting a pedicure, like that kind of stuff is super important.
Yeah, that's great. I think anything to just encourage. I think one of the things that will be interesting to see is how students either continue to engage and connect, or really being on watch for our students that have a tendency to disconnect. I know for myself, I'm like hyper aware of those students that aren't engaging in our things that we're putting available online and our Zoom calls, our connect groups, because I know that there's nothing else that's taking up their time, right? Like the only other excuse really would be like school. And so I know for me, like I'm hyper aware of that. And so it's like this consistent thought of how can I engage these students? How can I reach out to these specific students and give them some things to kind of latch on to? I think one of the things too that both of you have kind of touched on is just the value of our presence as pastors during this time is going to be huge. And I think that I know for myself, I can see like the fatigue coming of another Zoom call, another like live feed, another this, another that. But I think that for our students, that's going to be almost somewhat of an anchor for them each week. If there's a consistent presence for us, that I think does have an effect on mental health. And you guys have both touched on that in various ways. And so Cool. Well, that really, really helpful. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to pass it back to Bryant at this point. And I think Bryant said we may have gotten a couple of questions submitted, and I continue to feel free to post a question on here if you've got something specific that you'd love to maybe throw out there as a conversation starter for these guys. And so, Bryant, I know you've been receiving those, so I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, so we've gotten a couple of questions that kind of follow on the kind of the same path. I'm going to mention both of these and allow Dylan and Deandra to respond. These questions are from McLeod Best and Brock Bass. How do you balance safety and security in regard to private messaging minors and still caring for the student? And then Brock asked, in our ministry, we try to have a rule of 3 where we don't have a student leader in a private one-on-one situation. One way we can accomplish this is by meeting in public spaces. With social distancing in place, how can we strive to maintain accountability when it can be tough to have a third person on a digital discipleship meeting?
So I think one easy thing to do is just kind of like drawing one other point in, if they have a small group leader or if they have something like that, including them or, putting them as part of the message, and even ask like, hey, we're going to have this conversation. Is it okay if, this other person is included on that? I think that's just an easy way to kind of like have some support and have some type of credibility in that type of situation, and, kind of keeps us above anything like that and kind of blameless in that way.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add from that. Obviously, from a counseling perspective, that's a little bit different than, I have one-on-one sessions in my office all the time. But from the student ministry perspective, the 3 people is super helpful. This is just me talking out loud, but maybe getting the parents' permission before you have like a conversation with the student. And then even asking, do I have your permission to record this and delete it just for accountability, so that they know like exactly what's said and that your words can't be twisted and things like that.
That's good.
But you definitely would want to have permission for that.
Yeah. Another question that came in, this is from Billy Leach. What are some ways we can effectively minister to and care for students and their families outside of small groups, Bible studies, Zoom, text, etc.? How can we think outside of the box in ministering to them?
I think one thing that's important right now, for the church to do, because people aren't necessarily proactive on their own. So I think it's important for us as the church to be proactive in just taking care of their family unit. And sometimes what that looks like is not asking them to only do a family devotion. I think that's great that we're encouraging that. But I think also like encouraging helps with a family night and what that looks like. It's really good for mental health just to get out of the box sometimes. And so maybe if we could find, I know Jacob's on all kind of like youth ministry Facebooks and things like that, and we're just constantly seeing different people doing things from like scavenger hunts with their family to different kinds of posts of like, I think yesterday was like figure out the most like awesome quarantine outfit that we saw, different things like stuff like that we can really encourage them to not be bored. It's giving them something to do, but it's also a little different than just the Zoom calls and the Bible studies and things like that. Just giving them different things that they can engage in to give them something to do and just to bond as a family, that Deuteronomy 6 lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's something that we can kind of provide, because a lot of parents, some parents could be creative and come up with that stuff on their own. But sometimes if you kind of just feed them those things, parents would be willing to do it. They just, may not have the time or the energy to kind of come up with it on their own. So no, I think that's great, Deandra. I think that's a great way that we can kind of instill connection and kind of ease that process for these families.
Brock, I thought you had a really good idea. Would you mind unmuting yourself and sharing that idea with us real quick?
Yeah. So, hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ironic because trust me, I'm not a mathematician. I got out of engineering pretty quick whenever I was at Clemson, but one of our families, they have a student who, for her, math has been really difficult. And they just reached out to me. We're friends anyway. And her mom was just like, "Hey, I know you're not a math guy, but like, could you just kind of help us a little bit? Just me and her dad are kind of at our wits' end in some ways, and we're getting frustrated." And I think I can't remember who mentioned that early. Maybe it was DeAndre, just like family stress and just being together. And now school for some families is at home, which is not the usual. So yeah, it's just been a cool, like, I never thought I would be tutoring somebody in math, but it's become a lot more than just math, like for her family. And so we have a Zoom call, and her mom, is kind of in the background and stuff. And so we're able to do that. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, I think a way for their family just to take a breath for an hour. And, their daughter's working on math with me, and I'm learning 6th grade math again. So we're just kind of working through that, but it's been cool. And so me and the family pastor at our church, Josh Jones, we're really thinking, like, is this an opportunity? Like, we've got some people even on our staff who are like elementary education majors, and just, is this a chance for us to meet some, just felt needs?
That's good. That's good. Another question that we received was, how can we best evaluate and see if what we're doing is effective in encouraging students during this time? How do we know if we're really moving the needle with them right now?
I mean, that's the hard thing. Because obviously when you're working with somebody, face to face, you can judge based on the nonverbals. How are their expression? How are they acting? Obviously, are they actually connecting? Are they engaging in the things you're doing? Are they engaging in small group? Are they doing those things? Right. And again, what feedback are you getting from them? During prayer requests, or I guess you could during, if it's a Zoom call or some type of video chat, you could judge based on how they're acting. But also, you could just ask them directly, and most kids are pretty honest about it, especially if they trust you.
Sure.
And I know trust is something you guys have been building, long before this time, which pays off now.
Right.
I think one thing that you could do, if you're kind of talking to a student more specifically, like they're letting you know, like, this is my struggle, I'm really dealing with this. One thing you might could do with that student is set a few goals, like specifically, like, okay, you're really struggling with isolation and loneliness. Well, let's work towards you connecting with 3 people every single day. Like, that's your goal. Let's work on you journaling every single day. Like, that's your goal. And then you can have a follow-up conversation with them in a few days. Okay, have you met your goals? And how is that? How have you responded to that? How is it affecting you? What's been good and what hasn't been? And then from there, you can tweak it to, this didn't work for you, but this did. So how can we expound on that?
That's strong. I like that. That's very practical, very easy to do for sure. Last question that I have that I've received is, we've had some people ask, what helpful resources are available to us regarding books, podcasts, websites that you would say, as a student pastor, this might help kind of up my game in the area of counseling students, guiding them well? Is there any practical resources that you would say, hey, student pastor, they should have this book in their library, they should be listening to this podcast, this is a helpful website? What resources might y'all recommend?
I think there's plenty of books out there, and I don't really, off the top of my head, I can't think of any, and hopefully DeAndre does. But obviously, there's a lot of things practically that you could recommend, just along the same lines of what DeAndre was talking about, of giving them some type of goal-oriented type things to do. especially if they're dealing with anxiety. You want to kind of push them to do like, hey, there's some to deal with the physical symptoms of it. You can push them into doing some guided breathing exercises or some relaxation stuff. There's even biblical based like mindfulness meditation stuff on YouTube that kind of helps root them in the present, whereas anxiety is very future focused, and there being a lot of unknowns in our future right now. The mindfulness is very helpful in rooting us in, okay, what's going on right now, what's going on around me in the present. So that's something that you could kind of encourage them to do as an individual. But I'll pass it to you, Deandra.
Yeah, I'm not like necessarily the best with keeping up on some of the resources, but I do have a lot of things in my library that could be beneficial. A while back, I sent to Bryant some things that were really issue based with different books and different resources. So I still have that. I wouldn't mind sending, I'll kind of forward that back to Bryant or back to David, whoever that can kind of send that out to you guys, whoever has y'all's email. But it has like specific books, specific things. Some of them you can get on Kindle, stuff like that are for specific like stuff that's going on, and a lot of it is anxiety, depression, stuff like that. But like Dylan said, YouTube is really good with some of that guided breathing. With doing a lot of kids counseling, I like to call it bubble breaths, like literally blowing bubbles and seeing how many you can make and just controlling your breathing, which does have physiological effects on calming you down. So don't discount like some of those resources of YouTube and stuff like that, where you can really help your students to focus on the reality of what's going on right now and not looking as much to the present.
Yeah. That's good. What we'll do is we'll take what you sent me and I'll put it on the resources section of whystuff.org, and we'll make that available to anybody that wants to check that out. So I appreciate you mentioning that. We ought to highlight that for sure. The last question I've got is, how do you know when to refer a student to professional counseling? How do you know when, hey, I've had this conversation with this student, they're dealing with this issue. At what point do you say, hey, I've taken them as far as I can go, as a non-professional? At what point, how do you gauge that?
Jacob and I have that conversation literally all the time. And it's a hard thing, but I think as student ministers, we want to help. That's our nature, is we want to help. Like, we want to be the ones that really can speak truth. I think that's where you really have to have good self-awareness as a student minister. Like, I'm not knowledgeable on eating disorders. That's, and YouTube can only, and Google can only take you so far. But I think that's really gets into the hand of a student minister. Like, I love this student enough that I know that I have not been equipped with how to deal with that. And so just really knowing your limits and knowing, like, I've been talking to this student for 3 days, and I'm really getting nervous that nothing is happening, or 3 weeks or 3 months or however long it is, that she's not really growing or he's not really growing, and they're not taking the steps necessary. If you don't see growth with what you're doing and what you know how to do, then I think it's at that point okay to say, I would love to refer you to somebody else, and just really being self-aware of, I haven't had experience with this. I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to refer you to somebody else.
Yeah. So I think obviously one bit of it is that, like, that your level of comfort, your level of experience with dealing with those types of things. And then also as best you can, try to kind of assess like how much impairment is actually going on here, like how much of their functioning is actually being affected. So you can tell when that enters into, is it entering into their relationships? Is it affecting their academics? Is it affecting their emotions, their physical well-being? The depth of the impairment also matters a lot. So yeah, and always feel comfortable just like recommending that, asking them for permission to talk to their parents about it and seeing if that would be something they're open to. And I will say for right now, a lot of, as far as like referring right now for anxiety and stuff, a lot of commercial and private insurances, and I think even Medicaid just kind of caved on this as well. They are making concessions to make telehealth something that is used for counseling. So, counselors can bill that now. And so that they can do that through, and I guess different counseling offices have different infrastructure for that, because there obviously has to be something that's secure and stuff like that. But my office does it, and it's been pretty successful with only a few little hookups. But it's new to a lot of counseling offices around here, because it's probably something that people have done primarily through like self-pay and stuff. But there are a lot of offices out there that are billing telehealth stuff. So know that resource is available. Recommend that. They don't actually have to physically go to the office. Now, I will say there are maybe some insurances that are cool with new patients. I haven't gotten clarification with Medicaid and stuff, but that's definitely something that is available to them even during this. And I would say, I will say that you could recommend them looking for someone locally, because obviously, as licensed counselors, we can practice and give counseling to anybody within the state. We're licensed to do that. But if at all possible, have them connect with somebody that's local, because that would let them follow up with them after all this is over and after everybody can kind of get back to normal life. You would want them to be able to make that connection locally. But in the absence of that resource, you could even, send them my way. Like, I could counsel them. And Deandra, I don't know if y'all are set up for the telehealth stuff, but obviously either one of us, we'd be willing to do that or point you in the right direction.
Good.
Yeah, we are doing telemental health. It's a new thing for us. We were not offering that prior to COVID-19. So that's something that we've done. I also, I'll send this to David or Bryant but last night with my director of counseling ministries at our church, we put together a list of some people in the Midlands and the lower state and the upstate that do Christian-based counseling. So we put together, we don't have a crazy amount of those, but I did put it together to be able to send out for a resource for y'all.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's 11:31, so we spent an hour together. Listen, Dylan, Deandra, I appreciate you guys so much coming on board and just sharing some thoughts. That was a lot of good stuff that felt like new stuff that I learned. Very, very thankful. If people wanted to get in touch with you and wanted to reach out, if they had questions kind of offline and wanted to respond to you, how could they best go about doing that?
I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Okay.
People have that.
Yeah, I'll do the same.
Okay. Thank you so much. David, Jacob, any last minute, last thoughts, final thoughts, anything like that before we kind of wrap up here?
I think it was great. I know Pat just put a little thing on there for student pastors across the state. I think that's great, man. Appreciate that, Pat. And man, I look forward to kind of pulling guys together from the state and continuing just to swap ideas and stay connected. And I think for us, like as I'm like listening to a lot of this stuff, I'm thinking about this for me too, and just the importance of even us as student pastors staying healthy, mentally, spiritually, physically during this time. And I think things like this and, being a part of maybe a weekly gathering of student pastors or something like that can be really, really helpful in a time like this. And so, man, super glad that all you guys came on.